And we are back for some more Seattle Kraken expansion draft speculation. And since last time I went over the Arizona Coyotes, who used to be the Winnipeg Jets, this time I thought I might as well go with the Winnipeg Jets. Although this particular version of the Winnipeg Jets is a completely different organization who used to be the Atlanta Thrashers, which incidentally is a franchise whose, let's just say, lack of success since their expansion in 1999, which led to them moving to Winnipeg 12 years later, is not a small portion of the reason that both Vegas and now Seattle got somewhat more favorable rules when it came to building their expansion teams. Which, while we will still have to wait to see how these rules turned out for Seattle, they definitely do seem to have worked in Vegas's benefit. That is, if you consider 37 more wins in their inaugural season than what the Thrashers had, and then a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, a better season. So if Seattle does turn out to be a competitive team, they will have in part the Thrashers to thank for it, and by extension, the Winnipeg Jets. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Now for the Jets coming into this current NHL season, they did have a pretty deep roster, especially on the forward end, that made it look like they probably were going to end up losing a pretty decent forward with some NHL experience to Seattle. And while for the most part the depth is still there, a certain blockbuster midseason trade with the Columbus Blue Jackets saw two potentially protected forwards leave and only getting one back in return, which does mean that at least one more of those guys they were probably going to end up having to leave exposed can now be protected. And on top of that, currently 15 games into this regular season, the Jets are right in the middle of the playoff picture in the North Division, so some more trades could potentially be in their future. But as far as their roster right now is concerned, let's see how things are looking on the forward end when it comes to who they'll end up protecting. Blake Wheeler, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Nick Ehlers are all locks, as well as newly acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois. And I do also think that it was pretty likely the Jets were going to end up protecting Roslovic, but with him leaving alongside Laine, that now leaves two more spots open on the forward end for the Jets to use for protection. And as things stand right now, I could see those spots going to two of potentially three players that could end up filling them. And those three players to me are Adam Lowry, Andrew Copp, and Jansen Harkins, with the two most likely players to end up getting those protection spots in my eyes being Adam Lowry and Andrew Copp. But when we do get to talking about the players that will be available for Seattle to select from, I will talk about all three just in case Harkins does take the spot of one of those other two. But this is where Roslovic also leaving the Jets alongside Laine could potentially come back to bite the Kraken, because I think either Copp or Lowry, if they had become available, which they would have if Roslovic had been protected, would have been an excellent pick for Seattle. But before we get to that on the defensive end when it comes to protection list, I do think things here are pretty straightforward. Where potential trade aside, I think it would be pretty surprising to see any one of Joshua Morrissey, Dylan DeMello, or Neil Pionk available for the Kraken to select. Because while protecting these three, which to me is pretty much a lock, does leave some pretty decent options open on the defensive end for Seattle to pick from, these are still definitely the three best defensemen that the Jets currently have. And then in goal, well, things are pretty much just as straightforward there, as Connor Hellebuck is going to be the protected goalie. So now we can start getting to some potential future players for the Seattle Kraken. And I'm going to start with Adam Lowry and Andrew Copp, although I do think, once again, both of these guys have the inside track as things stand right now to be protected. At the age of 27, Lowry is just slightly the more experienced of the two players, having played in 7 NHL seasons with 422 games to his name, in that time having put up 132 points on 61 goals and 71 assists. And while from a points production standpoint alone, those numbers aren't terribly impressive coming from a center, Lowry's big draw is that he is a pretty good two-way forward and has played very well in the defensive end on the Jets' third line. Which, although granted he did have a bit of a down year last year, has shown up in his career advanced stats with his 50.2 Corsi for percentage and an expected plus-minus of 3 over the course of his career, which are both stats that he's been on the good side of more often in his career than not. And has seemingly, at least to this point so far this season, been able to bounce back from what was a rough season last year, with being on pace to have his best stats since the 17-18 season, which was a very good one for him. I mean, even just to go back to points production for a second, he's already been able to perfectly equal the 10 points on 4 goals and 6 assists that he had last year in 49 games in just 15 games to this point in the season. Which, if he can continue his bounce back season for the Jets, probably ends up meaning nothing to Kraken fans because, well, that is pretty likely a good sign that he will end up protected. And then a year younger than Lowry, but at least so far very much a similar career to him, is Andrew Copp, who at the age of 26 has also played in at least part of 7 different NHL seasons with 370 games behind him, in that time putting up 122 points on 50 goals and 72 assists. So like Lowry, Copp, who also plays at the center position, has not made a career out of being an elite points producer, but instead has made it out of being a very strong defensive forward. And again, we see that in his advanced stats with a 50.6 Corsi for over the course of his career and a 9.4 expected plus minus. Stats which he was kind of on both sides of last year with a 51.1 Corsi for and a negative 8.38 expected plus minus. But regardless of what you want to make of Copp's season last year, where he had 26 points in 63 games, again, like Lowry, he has had quite a bit of a bounce back this year, already with 12 points in their 15 games. So again, like Lowry, for fear of sounding like a broken record, Copp, especially if he can keep up the pace he's at point scoring wise so far to this season and not fall off on the defensive end, he also will very likely find himself on the protection list. So then if in fact both of those guys do end up getting protected, that probably means the best option on the forward end is more of a younger player that is less proven at the NHL level, like Jansen Harkins. Now for the 23-year-old center who made his NHL debut last year, he put up just 7 points in 29 games, which actually isn't too bad for a new guy, especially considering he got far from first line type of minutes. But so far this year, in the 10 games that he's played, even with a slightly reduced amount of ice time even to what he had last year, he has yet to put up a point. Plus, on top of that, his advanced stats really don't show a player that's been on the positive end of those either. But 39 games over the course of 2 years with limited playing time is hardly enough to really tell the story of what kind of player Harkins could end up becoming. And again, at the age of 23, he's certainly young enough to still make a decent career for himself. Plus, at the AHL level last year, he did impress with 31 points in the 30 games he played before making his debut in the NHL. So maybe given some more time at the NHL level and maybe some more time on the ice to get into the flow of the game a bit, he can bring some of that points production he's seen at the AHL level to the NHL, and if he can do that, could still be a pretty decent center option for the Kraken. Another guy the Kraken could also potentially look at though, again at the center position, is 25-year-old Mason Appleton. The former 6th-round pick made his NHL debut at the age of 23 2 seasons ago, where he put up 10 points in 36 games, which is actually pretty decent considering he did it with just over 8 minutes of average ice time. And although he did take a bit of a step down from that last year with just 8 points in 46 games, so far this season he has seemed to have bounced back with an expanded role, playing nearly 14 minutes a game, and as a result having 9 points in the 15 games they've played. Plus, he has been able to put up some fairly respectable numbers when it comes to his advanced stats, and all of this is coming off of a couple of very strong seasons at the AHL level between 2017 and 2019, where he put up 98 points in 116 games. So assuming he can continue and build off of the strong start that he's gotten so far to this point in the current season, I do think that Appleton could actually offer a pretty decent forward option for the Kraken to pick. Which is all before we even get to considering the fact that a name like Appleton is perfectly suited for the state of Washington, even if he is from Green Bay, which means he's probably a Packers fan. Ugh. So both Appleton and Harkins, for whatever amount of time he can get on the ice this year, are both players that future Kraken fans should be keeping their eye on when watching the Jets this season. And as we move over to the defensive end, another guy to be keeping your eye on this season is Sami Niku. For the 24-year-old defenseman who has now played in part of 4 NHL seasons, he currently has 10 points in 51 games in his NHL career so far. Which, granted again, it is a small sample size for a young defenseman. While that isn't terrible, it also isn't particularly great, especially his 2018-2019 season where he only had 4 points in 30 games, which definitely is not what the Jets were looking for. And on top of that, from more of an advanced stats perspective, he has definitely left quite a bit to be desired there so far to this point in his NHL career. So coming off of a season where he had 5 points in 17 games, this year could go a long way into shaping what his future at the NHL level could end up looking like. And if he can show at least some of what he was able to produce at the AHL level over the last few seasons where he put up 80 points in 114 games, then he definitely should have a spot in the NHL. But that will just remain to be seen whether or not he can bridge that gap. And with it being at this point almost a guarantee that he will be exposed for the Kraken to pick, if he is able to bounce back this season and show some of that promise that he showed from the AHL, then the Kraken definitely could pick him up and maybe use him as a defenseman for the future, or if they think he's ready, just put him right in at the NHL level. But if either he continues to struggle at the NHL level this season, or the Jets don't really give him much of an opportunity to show what he can do this year, then the Kraken would really just be selecting him as taking a chance on a young defenseman that still has shown some promise at least at the AHL level anyway. And if they are going to go the route of just taking a chance on a younger defenseman, then probably the better option there is Logan Stanley. Now, granted, at the AHL level anyway, the 22-year-old 2016 first-round pick has not really shown as much from a points production standpoint as Niku has, with only 32 points in 117 games. But what he lacks in points production, he more than makes up for in size, at 6'7", 230 pounds. And while it definitely would be nice if he was able to start contributing to some goal scoring, it also is nice to have that big, intimidating defenseman that can prevent goal scoring on the other end. And sure, maybe he was drafted in the first round by the Jets because they were hoping he could become the next Zdeno Chara, which it's hard to say that that's going to be what happens given how things have gotten off to a start for him, but you never know. Again, he is just 22 years old and he has a lot of career ahead of him. And again, ultimately, regardless of what really happens this season, where he currently has no points in 13 games, if the Kraken were to select him, it would really just be them taking a chance on a younger player that they think they can develop. So then it's just really up to you from a superstitious point of view to decide whether or not you think it's a good thing to have a guy with the last name Stanley, while you go for a cup named after somebody with a similar last name. But for what it's worth, he's just the fourth person with the last name Stanley to play in the NHL, and two of those other three ended up as Hall of Famers, including Alan Stanley, who won the Stanley Cup 4 different times with the Toronto Maple Leafs, including their most recent one. Which, granted, that was in 1967, but still. Beyond those two, really the only other guy on the defensive end I really see as being even a potential option as somebody the Kraken could look at would be Tucker Poolman. But with Poolman, he is a few years older than the other two, and with 85 games under his belt, really doesn't have all that much more significant NHL experience. Plus, with just 18 points on 5 goals and 13 assists over those 85 games, it's not like he's going to be bringing a whole lot more points production than either one of them would. Really, the biggest draw with Poolman is that he has a right-handed shot, which for defensemen is a little bit harder to find. So ultimately from the Jets, I do think the Kraken are going to end up getting a pretty decent player, even if it is probably going to be a guy that's more on the younger end with a little bit less NHL experience than they were probably hoping or originally looking at coming into this season. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to who I would like to see the Kraken take from this team, I do think that I would like to see them take a forward here, probably again either Harkins or Appleton, assuming that both Lowry and Copp are going to be protected. And the reason I'd like to see them take one of those two rather than any of the defensemen that would be available is because with the 7-3 split of protection list that most teams will be taking, it means that pickings will be much more slim when it comes to forwards across the league than it will be for defensemen. So when you run across a team like the Jets that has enough depth at the forward level that you can still get a decent forward even with them protecting 7, then that's an opportunity that the Kraken probably will have to take. But before we finish up, there is at least one side deal I could see developing here with the Jets, and especially considering this is a team, again, with a fair amount of depth that would otherwise lose a decent young player on either the forward or defensive end, there is incentive for them to consider to do so. On the Jets side of things, they would probably not mind having a way to get rid of the last 3 years of Brian Little's contract, especially considering the flat cap for the next couple of seasons and the fact that he's set to cost them over $5 million for the next 3 years. But with Little, who has been struggling with concussion issues for about a year and a half now and is likely to sit out the entirety of this season, at the age of 33, it's entirely possible that his career may be done. And if that is the case, and assuming he does miss the entirety of this season, it's very likely he could end up exempt from being selected by the NHL. But if the NHL were to allow him to go onto the exposure list, and the Jets were to make a trade with Seattle in order for them to take him, then what they would get in return is, again, either picks or a prospect. With the Jets having already a couple of picks down for this next draft, I don't think that it's too likely that they're going to want to be parting with any more of their draft picks. So if a deal here were to happen, whether or not it involves Brian Little, it would probably end up going the prospect route where, again, Seattle's probably going to be looking for a promising young forward that they can develop, like maybe David Gustafsson. Either way, though, that will bring us to the end of this video. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy it, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. Otherwise, I would love to know in the comments section your thoughts on the Jets and who you think they'll protect or who you would like to see the Kraken select. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace!